everyone, and welcome back. Today we are talking about White Lotus episode 2, A New Day. And I have to say I'm enjoying myself. I think this is a show that you're either done with or you're intrigued. And for me personally, I've worked in customer service for a long time. And so a lot of these scenarios are very true to life. So it makes me cringe and smile at the same time because it takes me back to, not so pleasant days. So the emphasis this episode is on perspective and how perspective is everything. And also they start to weave in all the different characters together, not just between the guests themselves, but also the guests and the hotel workers. And so the episode starts off with Olivia and her friend, one reading Nietzsche, one reading Freud, which is appropriate. Again, this emphasis on perspective. And they do this right at the start. We get a contrast between the hotel workers and the guests are having a great time, right? So Nicole's husband realizes he doesn't have cancer. The two girls got high. I don't know how they smuggled in so many drugs. That's a whole other conversation. Tanya wakes up. She had the best massage. And you get kind of this overview of how these guests are happy so far and they're comfortable and, life is great. Life is grand. They're kind of finding themselves. And then you kind of cut away to the hotel workers coming into work and they're tired, and you see Belinda, she has this flower in her hair and she just looks like she's counting the minutes, before she can get out of here. And people don't understand how much work it takes to make guests feel comfortable, to make customers feel for you to feel that comfortable anywhere, whether it be in a shop, at a hotel, somebody's working very hard behind the scenes, right? And so we get a conversation between Belinda and Armond. And Armond, he is a ticking time bomb, right? He is just wound up too tight. And he is feeling stressed, mostly because his trainee had a baby. And he feels bad because he didn't notice, right? He'd been kind of yelling at her, screaming at her. Not screaming, but, kind of he was on her. And he's like, I didn't notice this woman was in labor. He doesn't know if the baby's dead or alive. And he doesn't know what this means for the hotel. He's just kind of stressed, right? And on top of that, he's a recovering alcoholic. So this episode, he meets his edge, right? He kind of hits a breaking point. And he is just one of those people that behind that smile, there's just a lot of agony and a lot of pain. And just before Belinda leaves, you see him kind of pick up the phone and, there's a customer complaining about the sound bar on a TV or something stupid like this. And I don't think people understand, if you worked in you can always tell people who have never worked in customer service. There's two types of people who, after trying on clothes, will put their clothes back on the hanger. And then there's the other type of customer that leaves their clothes in a pile. And Armond is dealing with those people that leave their clothes in a pile, right? He's dealing with kind of the most entitled and the most sort of, just people don't see themselves. As soon as they become customers, they feel like they're owed the universe. And so it seems like Armond has been doing this for a very long time. He's very good at it, but he's only human, right? There's only so much a man can take. So this is the episode where they start to weave in all the different characters. And even before they start to do that, you can see Armond is stressed. So all these characters are already stressed on their own. And the more they interact with each other, it doesn't reduce the stress, right? It creates more tension. And so we'll start off with the interaction that was the most interesting to me, which was between Nicole's family and the honeymoon couple. So the honeymoon couple is the most annoying, but also the most interesting. I enjoyed their conversations. I enjoyed their interactions. They have chemistry, I will say. And so what we learned from the first episode is that they're newly married. They're very young. They're very good looking. He's from a very rich family. She is not. And we're not really sure what their motivations are, right? So they're sitting at breakfast and Rachel mentions that she gets a job opportunity. And he's just like, why are you bringing this up? So Rachel is a journalist. She hasn't worked in months, we learn, because of the wedding, but she wants to get her foot, she wants to get back into it. And although it doesn't pay much, again, it's more about exposure. The thing about the arts and journalism, you're never it's a long game. You have to really hustle and you really have to work hard because you have to create your own opportunities, right? People don't just hand you these opportunities. And this is not something that Shane understands. And so Shane is just looking at her girl, the gig is up. You don't have to pretend to impress me anymore. You can just be rich now. He's looking at her he has the audacity to call her work, I think, disposable garbage. He's basically girl, you won, okay? You don't have to do anything. I am here for you. And she's horrified, right? Because at this point, she really feels like she's trapped, right? Like he is the one with all the money. He's the one with all the power. And all she had was her career that she's worked very hard for. And this seems to be slowly disappearing. And the most important thing to note here is the contrast between this first conversation and the second conversation. So at the start of the episode, Rachel kind of sees her husband as a hindrance. And later on, towards the end, he kind of becomes a tool, right? But Shane just triggers everybody. And Shane is kind of like the key, you know? He's the one that is starting to set everything in motion. So he triggers his wife and he triggers Armond. So there's this running storyline between Armond and Shane that I'm really enjoying. And the whole issue here is Shane was put in the wrong hotel room. So basically the hotel had double booked the room that he wanted and they won't admit to it. So there's a conversation between Shane and Armond where Shane kind of says, hey, you guys made a mistake. Please admit to your mistake. And there's a lot of red flags here, and there are a lot of signs that Armond is slowly kind of snapping. First, he kind of does the whole passive-aggressive, well, if there was a mistake, we'll be happy to fix it, right? And his tone, you know what I mean? Like an email from your mother. Like, if you work in this industry for a long time, like you learn to talk down to people without actually talking down to them, right? Like you learn to kind of smile, but like for you, like I hate your guts without saying I hate your guts. So Armond is really kind of saying one thing, but he means something else. And Shane is getting that energy. But the thing to note about this conversation is that at one point, Shane was like, okay, can you just move us into the room that I wanted? And Armond says something strange. He's like, yeah, you know, they're leaving on Wednesday, and because of some cleaning policy, we can't really move you into the room. And at face value, it seems like an okay answer. You're like, okay. But something wasn't settling, right? Because again, like Shane can kind of sense that Armond does not like him, which is understandable because Shane is a very unlikable guy. And then Shane kind of takes it a step further where he actually goes over to the couple staying in the room that he feels he's supposed to be staying in. And he learns that actually Armond lied. And I find it very peculiar that Armond lied because he really seems like the type of guy to just be like, sorry, we made a mistake. We'll move you in as soon as possible. Instead, he kind of does this whole song and dance to really, he does not want to give Shane what he wants, you know? And for a character like Armond, that's really unusual because in this type of industry, you just kind of want to, you know, settle everything quickly, right? I'm sorry, we'll do it really fast. But for some reason, like Armond is really kind of pushing back and Shane is pushing back, right? And so then Shane goes into kind of a meltdown and he starts calling all these people and, you know, doing all these things to try and get on Armand's butt. But again, this is the first indication that you can see that Armond is slowly like, he's slowly over it, right? And the other person who's over it is his wife. Like his wife is pretty much sick of hearing about this damn hotel room. Like since the beginning of their honeymoon to the end of their honeymoon, all Shane has been talking about is this room and getting them into the right room. But, you know, it's like, dude, just chill. Like it's all good. And during this time period, you kind of catch glimpses of Rachel looking at her husband and, you know, the guy speaks German. He speaks, like he's very well educated, right? Like because he's had time and money, right? And so watching him and watching his entitlement with this hotel and this room is kind of disgusting to her, right? Like she kind of looks at him like, dude, are you serious? And so she gets kind of an opportunity. Something about Shane kind of sparks a fire and she decides, okay, I have to do something for myself and I'm gonna go talk to Nicole, right? Like she realizes she has to make her own opportunity, and what better chance than now? And I was really surprised that she kind of went up to Nicole, right? Like, because she seems very timid, very shy. So this conversation with Nicole completely rewires Rachel's brain because she kind of goes from being a victim to like, baby wants power. So she's surrounded by all these rich people and she feels like she has imposter syndrome and she doesn't know what to do with herself. So she approaches Nicole like a sister, right? She feels very connected to her and she just kind of dumps all her problems on her. And Nicole seemed down, you know, she's like, yeah, girl, you can talk to me. Like, I'm happy to give you advice. And Nicole apparently is a very powerful woman. She has a lot of money. She has a lot of connections. She's someone who's really made a name for herself. And from what we can see, like, it seems like a very nice, approachable person. But after this conversation, you see that she's kind of like a wolf in sheep's clothing. So Rachel is saying that she has a career crisis, right? Now, she's somebody who's had to hustle her whole life. She's had to work very hard. And when you've had to work very hard for everything you have, you're very aware, right? And that's what she's trying to articulate. She's saying, you know what? I have this opportunity. It might not be much, but it's huge, right? And especially in these fields like journalism and arts, like you have to create your own opportunities, which is what she's doing with Nicole. Otherwise, it's impossible. And so her husband doesn't seem to understand the importance of these jobs. Like, it's not about money, it's about exposure, it's about, you know, fine-tuning your craft and doing what you love. And so the way she articulates it is that Shane's world is kind of so powerful that she's afraid that she's going to become kind of a moon in his, you know, his orbit. And I like how she articulated that, because I think it's quite terrifying when you meet people like this that are so well connected and they're so, you know, they're just larger than life, and they have all this experience and they have all this knowledge that you don't have. And so it's quite scary, because this person can either elevate you or destroy you, right? It can kind of eliminate you as you know, completely destroy your sense of self, what it is you want. You know, you kind of forget who you are. So Rachel's kind of in this panic too. And in addition, she's also in this panic because although he's very rich, they signed a prenup. And Nicole kind of unpacks that. So she's like, oh, okay, that's why you're afraid. So it seems like if Rachel gets divorced, she's not set up for life. Now, as someone who's had to hustle their whole lives, like if you are used to working for everything you have, like the idea of nothing is terrifying. I don't care who you are. Like the idea of going back to zero is just non-negotiable. So for Rachel, her career is kind of a backup plan, right? Like she kind of needs this in case this doesn't work out. And she's not too confident in this marriage, right? She's not too confident about Shane and how long this can really go on for. And so Nicole's advice is, you know, your independence is everything. You know, you need to make sure that you push, you need to make sure you do what's best for you. And this was a good conversation, right? It was wholesome, it was great. And just before they end the conversation, Rachel kind of mentions the fact that she wrote a piece about Nicole. And Nicole was like, oh, what piece was that? And Rachel says, oh, it was in Business Insider, it's about blah, blah, blah. And Nicole's whole face totally dropped, right? Like her face totally changed. She said, that was a hatchet job. How dare you? Like, that's bad journalism. Basically, Rachel wrote that the reason that Nicole was able to move up in the business world is because of Me Too. And she kind of took advantage of the climate. And that, you know, it kind of suggested all these things that undermined the amount of work Nicole felt that she had done to get to that position. And Nicole just goes in on her, right? So everything they had just talked about gets wiped away. Specifically, this idea, like, to keep your independence. So Rachel leaves that table and she is traumatized, right? Like, she doesn't know what to do. She, you know, is like, she can't tell her husband because, like, this will just nail her coffin. So now she has to start thinking about, okay, what can I do, right? And Rachel's a fighter, and I think her instinct, although initially was to feel defeated, you'll see towards the end that she starts to get some life back, but this whole conversation was fantastic. So this conversation with Nicole and Shane's whole interaction with Armond starts to create this tension, right? Where everybody's just kind of looking at each other different. So at the start of the series, everybody's laughing, smiling, you know, being super cordial. And now everybody's giving each other like the evil eye. So we get to the second conversation between Shane and Rachel, and this is over dinner. And again, it's about Rachel's job opportunity, right? She basically tells him, listen, I'm going to take it, you know, and she's a little worried, right? Nicole kind of shook her, and now she feels like, oh my God, I really need to do something for myself. And Shane is pissed off. He's pissed off because he's been dealing with Armond, and he's also pissed off because they're on vacation, right? They're on their honeymoon, and he has the audacity to be like, listen, I will literally pay you not to write this article. And that just sets her off, right? Like, and she's just like, excuse me, sir? Like, who do you think you are? And this has kind of an added undertone, especially considering the fact that Rachel signed a prenup and that she's not 100% secure, right? So either she continues her career or she makes Shane her career, right? Like, that's kind of the implication here, where he's basically like, listen, I'm your job. You know, like, in case you need me to remind you, like, I will pay you, but I'm your number one priority. And this kind of like takes her back. And then she gets a glimpse at Nicole, right? They kind of give each other this weird look. And Nicole is just, you know, with her family, and from the outside looking in, they're looking good and everybody seems happy. And then Rachel just snaps, right? She looks at her husband and she says, oh, by the way, did you know that that woman is a B and her daughter is also a B? Like she starts to kind of tear into Nicole a bit. And her husband, Shane, is just looking at her like, oh yeah, like he's kind of riled up. He's like, oh, okay, really? Like, give me more information. And the fact that she said that to him, you can kind of understand like her strategy, I think, will be to fight fire with fire. Like she might not be able to do anything, but her husband can, and his connections might be able to kind of give her some power. And so you get a sense that like her perspective is shifting a bit in terms of like what her husband can do for her. So I thought that was super interesting. And then we get to Nicole's table, and Nicole is like totally horrified, right? This family from the outside looking in looks perfect. They look amazing, but appearances can be deceiving, right? So Rachel kind of triggers Nicole, and she kind of takes her anger out on her daughter. She kind of looks at her daughter and she says, why is it that total strangers can respect me, but my own daughter can't? So I guess Olivia has a problem with her mother because she works in the tech world and she doesn't really like the impact that her company has on the planet. Like there's some type of issue here, which explains why she brought her friend as kind of a buffer between her and her mother. But it seems like her buffer is not working, right? Like there seems to be some issues developing between Olivia and her friend. And this has to do with this mysterious sort of busboy or this waiter. And so Olivia's at dinner and she's stressed out because they lost their bag of drugs. So throughout this episode, Olivia and her friend were doing drugs. And in this process, they lost their bag of drugs. And so they're kind of stressed, wondering like where their bag of drugs is. She's listening to her mother, but in the back of her mind, she's kind of panicked, right? So she gets up from the table, she finds Armond, and she's like, hey, is there a lost and found? Did you find a bag? And Armond is kind of looking at her like, I did, but I'm not going to tell you. And so during this time, she kind of catches her friend walking with this waiter. And she's kind of like looking at them like, what is going on here? Because the way they're walking and the way they're talking, it seems like they're a lot closer, or they have some type of connection that Olivia is not aware of. And the weird part is that when Olivia kind of confronts her, her friend just kind of lies, like straight up to her face. She lies once, she lies twice, and each lie just a lot more suggestive that she's hiding something. Like it's clear that her friend doesn't want to open up to her. And I'm not sure why Olivia's friend lied to her. Like there seems to be a reason, but this is going to create again some type of shift in perspective or some type of tension that's already building up between not just Olivia and her mom, but this sort of underlying tension that's developing between these two friends. So we get towards the end of the episode and we see like the harmony between everybody is being disturbed. Okay, so before we get to the end of the episode with Armond and his unraveling, I just want to talk about Belinda and Tanya. These two are, like, I find everybody on the show to be very interesting, just because, again, a lot of these situations are very true to life. And so Tanya is the woman who's by herself. She's older, she's a divorcee with a lot of money. Like she's one of those people that travels and goes to these places for the hospitality, right? Like she wants to feel connected, right? She wants to talk to somebody, and her somebody is Belinda, much to Belinda's sort of dissatisfaction. And so she gets a massage, she's feeling amazing, and Tanya says, hey, do you want to go to dinner with me? And Belinda is standing there like, I absolutely don't want to go to dinner with you. I do not want to spend any more time in this place than I have to. And when you're a customer, like, you kind of forget, like, we're people. Like, she wants to go to work and go home. She does not want to get off work and go to dinner with you. And so Belinda's coming up with a bunch of excuses, like, you know, it's not appropriate. Like, please take the hint that I want to go home. And Tanya's like, who do I have to talk to? You know, what do I have to do? And Belinda kind of says, okay, whatever, I'll go to dinner with you. You know, I'm off at 7. And then Tanya has the audacity to be like, yeah, I'll come through a few minutes after 7, which kind of shows you her privilege, right? Again, like people who've worked in customer service, like the better you can make somebody feel, they kind of develop this one-sided friendship with you, right? Like it doesn't occur to them that this is a job. Like I have to make you feel good. But once I'm off, I'm off. I don't want to see you anymore. But Tanya, again, is that customer that really wants that friend, right? She's alone. She doesn't have kids. She doesn't have a husband. So she really needs Belinda as like a safety blanket, right? Belinda is the person that she will come back for. And so Belinda understands this because, you know, you have to make the customer happy even if it makes you unhappy. And so we get to this dinner scene and it's the most bizarre thing ever, right? Belinda has her name tag on. She looks exhausted. She's just looking at her like, And Tanya is kind of praising her like, oh, you're so amazing at your job, blah, blah, blah. And Belinda kind of snaps. She says, you know what? I deal with a lot of rich white people and this is very difficult for me. And Tanya is like, well, why don't you start a business? Like, I would love to start a business, but I don't know if you noticed, like some of us have to work. And then Tanya's like, girl, I'll fund you. You know, the rich white people could really use somebody like you. And Belinda's like, okay. Like, so it kind of turned from this kind of weird, like, I don't want to be here. And Belinda's like, okay, well, if you want me to use you, I might. And then Tanya, like, she really kind of boasts, right? She looks at Nicole, she looks at everyone. She's like, this is the best masseuse ever. And Tanya is really like, you get the sense that she really likes Belinda. You know what I mean? And that she really wants to help her. But it's that kind of white savior complex, and I think it's very clever writing, you know what I mean? And Belinda's looking at her like, as badly as I want to use you, I don't know if I can mentally spend any more time with you. But again, their relationship is super interesting because it kind of breaks a fourth wall, right? Like, I think people who work in customer service, like, you don't want to spend any more time with customers than you have to, right? Like, you kind of keep this arm's length. And here's kind of a rare opportunity that seems a little too good to be true. So Belinda is trying to kind of keep it professional, but at the same time, Tanya won't let her. So it's weird. You know, Tanya is a weird character. She's one of those people that one minute she's interested and the next minute she's not. So I really hope she doesn't get her hopes up and then destroy it. Like, that's kind of the sense I'm getting. But that being said, we're at the end of the episode, and the most interesting thing to have happened was Armond and this bag of drugs, right? So the contrast between these hotel workers and these guests are like finding themselves. But I like the twist on finding yourself because everything they're finding is really negative and it's creating tension, right? So Nicole's husband finds out that his dad died of AIDS and not of testicular cancer. And Nicole's husband, up until this point, has been very passive. Like, his wife wears the pants, right? Like, he's just kind of there. And how this information will affect him and their relationship is really interesting. Olivia and her friend, they're not on the best of terms, right? Like, there's something going on there. And again, finding yourself is supposed to be this great thing, but it seems for these guests, it's not so great. Meanwhile, with these hotel workers, like, they're surviving. They're not finding anything, right? Like, they are done finding things. And Armond is like pretty much how they portray that, right? Like, Armond is done. His tipping point, and I think his breaking point, was Shane and dealing with all that. And he kind of pushed back to a point where it backfired on him, right? Like, Shane, like, he ended up getting a lot of flack. And so this kind of triggered him. So he takes the box, you know, this bag of drugs, and he ends up taking a pill. And for somebody that's that on edge and that kind of wired, like, nothing good can come out of this, right? Like, it's supposed to relax him, but for a personality like that, I mean, this is like the beginning of the end, right? Like, this is the beginning of the unraveling, not just between, you know, not just with Armond, but also the relationship between all the hotel guests and between the hotel workers and the guests, right? Like, everything's slowly kind of coming together and everybody's kind of interacting more, but this is not creating a pleasant situation. With that being said, I enjoyed this episode. I thought it was really good. I like Quinn finally getting out of the kitchen. Like, I think it's very bizarre that he was staying there. And he's the only one without any stake in anything, right? Like, he's just chilling. So his perspective is great, right? Like, he's seeing things with fresh eyes, and he might be like the reliable narrator here, but everybody else is becoming undone. So I enjoyed myself. You guys let me know what you think, and until next time.